My name is Stuart Younse, and I am currently the Artistic Director of the Connecticut Children's Chorus, which is a division of the Hart Community Division. I also teach in the summers in the Hart Choral Institute and the Summer Vocal Institute Music Theater Intensive. And I am currently the Director of Drama, actually, at Simsbury High School. I started, once I left Hart full-time, I came to Connecticut as a tenure track teacher at the Hart School and took the job at Simsbury in choral music, and that program grew to over 200, and we had to hire an assistant. And so little by little, I'm cross-certified in theater. I have moved towards theater, and it's been a nice, refreshing thing to have something different, though I still obviously have my hands in the choral area.
Do you want to tell us about your formative years?
I grew up in Texas, which for some people I think is probably not a great thing, but for me it was a great thing because Texas, the music education in Texas is really incredible, and there are some of the finest choirs, bands, and orchestras in both the middle school and high school areas, and that was really important to my life. I started piano when I was 6, and I excelled at that. I enjoyed it. I started singing when I was about 3. My mom is very musical, and she, I think, really wanted to be a musician, a professional musician, and that wasn't in her cards. So I think she was thought that one of her children would be a professional musician, and so I sort of had no choice. But those were great years. And probably the person that most influenced me in my childhood was my middle school choral director, and her name is Glenda Casey. Sadly, she passed away of cancer about 6 years ago. It's been a real loss. Glenda was probably closer to me than my own mom. And it just so happened that she was probably one of the top 50 choir directors in the state of Texas. She went on to be the state president of Texas Choral Directors Association and the Southwestern Division Choral Directors Association, and to have fantastic choirs. But she was so passionate, and I learned really, today, I still go back to things that she taught me when I was in 7th and 8th and 9th grade, that certainly I have studied and grown since then, but those first musical experiences of learning how to pull a phrase, of learning how to tune, of learning how to listen, of learning how to feel the music, and learning how to express, those things still stay with me today. I was lucky enough that once I left middle school and graduated from high school, we became really close friends. And in many ways, I kind of was the son she never had, and she was sort of my surrogate mom. And she helped me through those early years of my teaching career. And to this day, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think of her or hear her words. Often her words coming out of my mouth, which is kind of scary at times, but I dearly love her for the passion that she brought to what she did. Certainly her musicianship, but her love and her care for her students was pretty amazing. And that's what led me into teaching. I always thought I would be a teacher. When I was a young child, I played teacher. When I got to play, I was always the teacher. And my mom taught some kindergarten, and then was also in a school in the secretary position. And so I was around education all my life, and knew from early on that I wanted to teach. And it's interesting because when I went to middle school, Glenda said, she always would say that I walked in as a 14-year-old going on 35, and I was Beethoven, and I taught as much as she did. I learned to teach in her classroom and taught my friends, which was really a great experience. In high school, I excelled in piano, continued my piano studies. I had a pretty rough time with the voice change. And so singing suddenly, once I got to high school, became kind of very difficult for me in those years between the voice change and between when I was an adult. And so piano became very important to me. I started studying at Southern Methodist University when I was in high school, and graduated a year early and went on to the University of North Texas, which is in Texas in the country, the second largest school of music we have. And I started out as a piano performance major and was very excited about that and loved it. What I didn't love is that I did not want to marry the piano. And the life of a pianist is very lonely. It's hours and hours in a small room with a piano. I like to be social. And so I struggled the first year of college. I struggled the second year of college, and I realized at the end of the second year of college, of course, I was doing fine in classes. I just wasn't happy, and I realized that what I really wanted to do was teach music. And so I went to the music ed department, and I said, I want to teach music. And I have never regretted that decision. I have done a lot of accompanying, so my piano skills have been important to me. They certainly are important when I'm teaching. I don't regret the times that I learned and spent learning the piano. And I don't regret I've never looked back in the passion that I have for teaching. It's really, really important to me. So I graduated and got my first job, and I was scared, to say the least. I took a program that had 30 kids in it, and within 4 years we had 230 kids. And again, so much of the time I sort of did what Miss Casey did, and spent time at her house just about 3 nights a week, sitting at her table going, okay, this happened, what do I do? This happened, what do I do? And that's how I really learned. I was very lucky, however, that after my first year, again, I had had so many vocal issues with the change that I knew that the choir didn't sound right, and I knew that they were having vocal problems, but I didn't know enough about the voice to really help them. And I happened to go to an in-service my first year of teaching, and the teacher was a lady by the name of Joan Wall. Joan had sung at the Met in the 50s, and then went on to a career in Europe, and had settled in a very small little Texas university called Texas Women's University, and has, in her subsequent years, has gone on to write the sort of quintessential book on vocal pedagogy, on International Phonetic Alphabet. I mean, In My Backyard was probably the best vocal pedagogue in the country. And she gave this wonderful presentation, and I called her up. It was probably the most scary thing I'd ever done, was to call her and say, I'm teaching choir, I love music, I can play the piano, I love to sing until my voice changed, and I need help. So I started studying with her, and she said, why don't you come do your master's degree? So by the second year of my teaching, I was enrolled in the vocal pedagogy program at Texas Women's University, studying with Joan, and that was a pivotal time in my career, because I would go to class and learn, and then I would go to school the next day and do everything that I just did and try it out and see if it worked. And so those poor students it was my laboratory, really, and they had a lot of trial and error, but that's where I learned to teach voice and learned to sing myself. And I will always be beholden to Joan and to the work that she did with me. She has since retired, is still alive, but is not teaching anymore. And that was a great loss for so many people. She was a major influence in so many people's lives, and she has so many professional singers that are still in the business and doing quite well in New York and other places. I taught in what was then junior high school, and moved after 4 years, I moved to the high school as the assistant. And so I moved with a group of students that I had had for 3 years, and then they were my students for 4 years. So I had them for 7 years, which was a really unique experience. I was teaching alongside a master teacher for those first 2 years, and he taught me a lot about teaching, about working with kids, about really what expectation was about, and how to set expectations for kids that they could reach. He finally left and went on to do other things, and so I took over the program, and I was the director of choral activities then for the next 6 years at Haltom High School in Fort Worth, Texas. And those were great years. The program grew. We had a men's choir that sang for the Texas Music Educators Association, which is probably the highest honor you can have in the state of Texas. I did a lot of work with the various organizations, Texas Music Educators, as a region director, as a region chair, as a division chair. I got involved, not politically, but in service to those organizations and helped run competitions, and those things were very important. And there came a point just like when I was, after my first year of teaching, I was then in my 12th year of teaching, and I came to a place where before I didn't know how to teach them to sing. After 12 years, I started thinking, why do they do what they do? How does this work? How do they learn? How do they grow? And it became important to me to go back to school and to ask again those questions of how do we learn? How do we learn music? Why is music important? And that led me into my studies, my doctoral studies and PhD back at the University of North Texas. And I had success in the classroom. I had touched a lot of students, and I wasn't sure what I had done. And it was important for me to begin to ask those questions and to seek answers. And so for the next 4 years, I did the coursework at University of North Texas, which is in Denton, Texas, a little town just north of Dallas, which is also the town that Texas Women's University is in. So I went on to the faculty of Texas Women's as a dance musician, and I taught music to dancers. I did all of the accompanying classes. I actually ended up doing the choir at Texas Women's, and I was a theater musician. So while I was doing my doctoral studies, I was working full-time as well. But those were great days, and I learned a lot. When I finished my degree, or finished my coursework and my exams, I decided to go ahead and do a national search and start looking for positions at the collegiate level. And that led me to Connecticut and to the Hart School. And I took on a tenure track position as a choral music educator at Hart. I stayed for 3 years in that position, and finished the dissertation, became Dr. Younse, and loved those years. They were great years. But college professors don't make much money, and so the job at Simsbury opened, and it was really a very special situation because I was able to take the high school choral position and make enough money to live in Connecticut and pay all of the wonderful taxes we pay in Connecticut. But Hart kept me on in the role of working in music education. So I continued for the next 8 years to do a choir for Hart each semester. I continued to teach the methods courses. I taught vocal pedagogy. So really I was doing everything I had done at Hart minus the student teaching part. And I had a full-time job in the high school, and I was the director of the children's choir. And so I was really working 3 jobs and continued to do that until a couple of years ago. And I finally decided it was time to let the teaching at Hart go that happens during the year. So I stay on in the graduate program in the summer and teach teachers. And I certainly am still the artistic director of the Connecticut Children's Chorus.
And what year did you start at Hart?
Started in 2001. I appeared here in August, and I remember quite vividly, and will never forget because it was September 11th. I had been here 3 weeks, and I remember a beautiful day and a surreal day. And I remember that no one knew what was happening at the time, and our provost at the university really pushed us to continue our classes. And I was in a room full of college students who were sobbing because they had family that worked in New York, they had friends that were in New York, and they had no idea whether they were, and the provost had been very clear that we were to continue to teach, and that was a very trying day, but I will never forget when I came to Connecticut because of that.
And do you want to talk about what you can teach others about following your passion?
I think if students were, one of the things that Glenda used to say to me is, what do the kids say about you at the dinner table? You do all this stuff in the classroom, but what do they say to mom and dad? And I guess I hope that they say I'm passionate. And I love what I do. I love working with kids. I love working with adults. I love working with musicians. And I think that passion shows. And I think that in that way I'm a role model. And if I can be exciting and I can get excited and I can show them the passion, they somehow begin to find that passion in themselves. And so I think that's part of how we begin to teach. I don't see myself as a mentor, really. I see myself as a facilitator. I feel that every child is musical at their core, or theatrical at their core, and it's a process of encouraging them and setting situations around them that allow them to discover that. And when they discover that, that passion starts to pour out of them. And I've seen that happen over and over. And that is sort of the way I do it. I like to stand on the side and encourage, set up situations that help them discover themselves. And really, I think, while I adore music and I adore theater, I really think that art making is about learning who we are and learning about ourselves. And I think that that's probably the best part of learning art, is that we ultimately are looking in and looking at our own selves and how we see the world. And I think that's critical for every child. If there was one thing that I would change with music education, or wish I could change, is, first of all, its importance. I think there are many people that understand the importance of the arts, but I think as a population or a country, we don't. And that we certainly are not, of the students I teach, and I teach about 300 students, a year, many of them are never going to become professional artists. But what they are doing is learning about themselves. They're learning about taking risks. They're learning about building self-confidence. They're learning about being human. They're learning about empathy. They're learning about understanding what it's like to be someone else, to look in someone else's shoes. And that is, to me, the beauty. And I wish that every child had art classes at the core of our curriculum, not necessarily as extracurricular. I think if we could begin to work art experiences into math and science and social studies, I think that it would be beneficial, not only in learning those areas, but in learning about how the individual learns in those areas. I think that's really important. I think that as artists, we're creative, and I think that it's what I talk about as the creative process. It's very much like the scientific process. We have a hypothesis, a creative hypothesis. And instead of doing experiments, we practice, we try out different things, we explore different ways of proving our hypothesis. We find problems, musical problems that we have to solve, and we solve those problems. And the better we do it, the better our product is, and the more we communicate with the people that we're performing for. And to me, that's as rigorous as the scientific process, and I think it's as important for students to go through that process because I think it helps them learn to think beyond the just the rigors of science and math and language, and to see what could be, to vision what could be. And I think that's an important part of what we do as arts educators.
Is there one particular piece of music that stands out in your mind or has influenced you the most or your students the most?
My favorite piece of music is the piece of music I'm working on at the time. It's very difficult. I was thinking about this today. What is my favorite music? I have so many. I certainly love the intricacies of Bach. I love the transparency of Mozart. I love the depth of Beethoven. I love the passion of Chopin. Those are sort of my biggies. And I love the just sheer aesthetic beauty of Debussy. Those were probably my 5 favorite composers. And then I had just a ton of contemporary composers that, especially in the choral area, that mean so much to me. James Mulholland, Eric Whitaker. There's so many people that have written amazing pieces. And so whatever I'm working on at the time is my passion. And I don't know that the piece is important to me. The piece is the medium through which we come together and share human experiences. So each piece has it has its own set of problems, and those problems help us as students and teachers to have something to work on. So that's why the piece that I'm working on at the time is the most important. It brings up issues that we then explore, that we talk about, that we work through, that we can share human. And I think that's what art making is. It's about human experience. And so for me, the piece is a catalyst that opens up those conversations and those experiences and those musical experiences. So I don't know that I think of the work of art as as important as what we do with it. And I think that's why I would say that the piece I'm working on at the time is the most important to me, or the best.
Do you have a most moving professional moment in your life?
I've had many moving professional moments musically. I have some many mountain-type experiences with kids of all ages. I adore the children's choir. We've had some incredible performances. I adore the high school kids. I adore the college kids. And so musically, I have really many important things. But as a teacher, I think the most moving thing that ever happened to me is that as Facebook started and became sort of an important thing, I was able to reconnect to all of those students that I taught when I first started teaching in the 80s. And I got to see them grown. I got to see who they married. I got to see their children. I got to see them putting their children in choir in school and talking about going to competition and seeing their children's concerts and that kind of stuff. And I guess about 5 years ago, several of them contacted me and paid to bring me to Texas and rented a room in a hotel, and it was This Is Your Life. Probably 150 of my students from those early days, as well as colleagues, teachers, my boss, were standing in that room when I walked in. And I don't know what else could top that. That's the kind of thing that most people have at the end of their career, that the kids felt that way about the work we had done together. Again, I was a catalyst. I think bringing me in, obviously they loved me, I loved them, but it was a situation too that brought us all together to share again, and many of them performed that night. It was just a mountaintop experience to see that.
And although you're not at the end of your career, is there something you still want to accomplish that you have not accomplished?
Oh, sure. I want to continue to do what I do. I love the children's choir. I would love to see continue to grow. One of the things that we hope is in the future that we can begin to branch out into Hartford and to underprivileged students and have satellite programs to reach those students and to bring them into what we do. I'd like to see it be the Children's Choir to be one of the arts organizations in Hartford. I think that would be a really important thing because we have wonderful arts organizations for adults, and we have wonderful things for kids as well, and certainly in the schools and that kind of. But I think some of the programs we have in the community division, the Greater Hartford Wind Ensemble, the Opus orchestras, the Children's Choir. I think these are ways that our youth can be as involved in their community as their parents are in the Hartford Chorale or the Symphony or the Bushnell or the Hartford Stage. And I look at I look at that whole thing as a way of getting sort of an opportunity for those kids that have that kind of passion for it. Certainly the kids I teach at school have the same passion, but this is a situation where we have sort of the most advanced of the most advanced from all over the area come together, and that's very exciting to me, and I think it's a place for them to fit in, and I'd like to see that continue to grow, and maybe even begin to have a national reputation. It's an important thing for me.
Anything else you'd like to add?
I guess that, if there was one thing I want people to remember me by is passion, that I'm a people person, that I think music making and teaching is the highest calling. I think it's as spiritual in many ways as being a minister, though we certainly don't necessarily get into that in public school, but touching others' lives, helping them realize their potential. They help me reach my potential. I'm constantly changing and growing because I have wonderful students around me that I get to work with and that they work with me. And I hope that that's how I'm remembered, that I cared, that I helped people along the way, and that I shared some really wonderful, life-changing moments.